my memory of the fan buildup going into both 2022 and 23 that annoyed me, at least from the folks that watch us, is on the Notre Dame side, it was the lack of acknowledgement that Ohio State had been the better program for the past 25 or 30
I know who
years.
you're talking about. Yeah.
It was more than one person. If it was one person, okay.
I remember the one guy, but yeah, I get where you're going. Yeah.
And then the other was that there's no question Notre Dame's going to win these games. Well, and that Notre Dame is now the better program and now the better team. Okay, I certainly, especially that second matchup, there's a winner of the game, and then there is an evaluation of the football play. And walking off the field, all of us that have any honesty about us in any football sense throws up our hands and says, I don't know who the better team is. Went down to the last play of the game at the 1 yard line with 1 second left. Good. I don't know who the best team is. And the issue I had on the Ohio State side was 9 out of every 10 prediction scores that I saw in the chat was 52-3, 56-10. What?
You'll get that again. You'll get that again for this game.
Yes, I've seen them.
I mean, look, this is for Notre Dame. This is still part of the prove it mode, right, Mark? I mean, I said about last year's game that Notre Dame outplayed Ohio State except when it mattered most. And that's the mark of a great team. And you've got to do that and play in those moments in order to be on that level of that tier 1 elite status. And the thing that I've said is like, look, there's a lot of college football fans that like, fan bases that like to talk trash about Notre Dame. There's only really 3 that I'm going to listen to: Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. Why? Because Notre Dame hasn't beaten any of those teams in a long time. I mean, they've never beaten Georgia. They haven't beat Ohio State since around the time my grandmother, Pat, was born. And they hadn't beaten Alabama since the 80s. So you have to start proving that you can win those games. And they did that against Georgia. Now you have to do that against Ohio State if you want to be considered an elite team. I think anyone that's being honest and knows football is want to say that Notre Dame has kind of emerged as that top of tier 2, if not kind of broken into the bottom of tier 1. I kind of think you need to win a championship to truly be on tier 1. That's my opinion, because all my tier 1 programs have won in the last 10 to 12 years. But you've at least got to the top. But for people to truly look at this team and say, hey, look, they are a legit powerhouse team, you've got to win more of these games than they have in the past. I mean, what made Lou Holtz a legend? It was the fact that he had an Urban Meyer-esque record against top 10 teams. And every year you felt like, well, this Notre Dame team's got a shot to win a title. Won 1 title, should have won 2, for being honest. Because if you're going to say Notre Dame didn't win 89 because they lost a head-to-head against Miami, even though they beat number 1 in the Orange Bowl, then you should say, isn't that the reason they should have won it in 93? One of those 2 years, you need to give Notre Dame a championship. But that was the thing, though, Mark, back then, is you go I mean, they could beat anybody. You didn't want, I mean, there was a stretch where Miami won a title like 3 out of 5 years, and the 2 years they didn't win it, it's because they lost to Notre Dame. I mean, that's kind of how they were. And if they want to get back to that, that glory from the past, these are the kind of games you got to win. And, look, they almost won last year, but you don't come to Notre Dame to almost win. Now, that's Brian Kelly talk right there. Well, we didn't lose to Bama as bad as Ohio State did. Okay, you lost by 27, they lost by 28, and you scored a garbage touchdown, right? That's not Notre Dame football. It's, hey, we played that team, we beat that team. And that's what's at stake for them. That's what I'm excited about, is because it really lined up perfectly for Notre Dame, who they played and who they had to beat, for them to be able to say, hey, look, we belong on this stage.
Brian nicely set up my book plug here. 1990s Disputed National Champions. Look at 1993. It's only 99, folks. And everyone that has commented here, which I'm talking about 50, 75 people, have said, good read, enjoyed it. So you're a college football junkie, give it a look. We break down the 1990s and press it all toward the future. So it's not just a history book. All right, Brian, how much will it hurt if Notre Dame loses this game, making it all the way to the this point, considering they didn't just win a national championship 3 years ago or 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. It'll be disappointing. It doesn't hurt just to lose. I think it to me, it would strike me a lot like when Clemson lost to Bama in 15. It's a great game. Clemson had their chances to win. Bama pulled it out late. They showed that they're still that team, right? Like, you're still not the big dog yet. Good try, but you're not the big dog yet. But you could look at that Clemson roster and be like, they're not going anywhere. I mean, you could just say that you could see what they were doing. You could see some of the guys that had committed, and you're like, they're not going anywhere. And of course, the next year they went out and won a title. I'm not saying Notre Dame's going to go out and win a title next year, but what I am saying is you can look at this football team and see how young it is and be like, they're not going anywhere. What would hurt Notre Dame is if this game ends the way that some of the past big games have ended for them, right? So, like, if you go out and lose this game where you just get rolled, like Ohio State got rolled by Bama in 20, or like Ohio State got rolled by Clemson in 2016. I'm using that as an intentional example because apparently Notre Dame's the only team that loses games like that. Then some of the goodwill you gained by beating Georgia and beating Penn State kind of goes out. Yeah, those teams, when you played the really good team, that's when you got beat, right? And that'll be the talking point. But if this is a 4-quarter game and Notre Dame loses, you're going to be heartbroken for the team and for the players. But I don't think it changes the narratives that Notre Dame has kind of destroyed this season. You can't say, though, they haven't won a New Year's Six game in 30 years. Well, they won 2 in a week. You know what I mean? So, they can't beat, the SEC powers. Well, they beat the SEC champ in the playoff in the stadium where they played the SEC championship for a long time. Penn State's a better program than you. Well, no, they're not. So I think a competitive 4-quarter game says that Notre Dame's for real and they're not going anywhere. They get blown out, then I think the narratives kind of come back up. That's kind of how I look at it. I'd say the same thing for Ohio State. If Ohio State loses to Notre Dame in a hard-fought 4-quarter game, I don't want to hear any crap about Ryan Day's no good and he can't win the big game. You had to win plenty of big games to get here. This is a really good football team in Notre Dame. This is a really good football team at Ohio State. And, both of these teams should look back on the season and say, you had a phenomenal year. You had some bumps in the road and some growing pains and some tough games at times, but these are the 2 best teams in college football for 2024.
Yeah, I find it that everyone who is not, intellectually honest, or maybe they are incapable of being that, the big game criteria is only when you win when you lose the game, it becomes a big game. That was a big game. But when you win it, that wasn't a big game. They weren't that good.
Loose Emoji said that. Because people say, Notre Dame doesn't win any big games, and he'd list all these big games they'd won. And Lou said, what I learned is Notre Dame only plays in big games and they lose. And I was like, yeah, that's very true. Very true.
Yeah, for a lot of people, when I really pin them down, it gets to the point where only a national championship game is a big game. Mm-hmm. Unless you lose a game, then that's the only big win that you can achieve.
Sure.
Depending on who they're rooting against. Our buddy Jackson Johnson stopping by has a question for Brian. Have people stopped whining about Notre Dame not being in a conference, or will it pull back up in this summer?
It has amped up actually in the postseason because you have people who just really have no business talking college football. Like, Mark, just because you were a great college football player does not mean you should be talking about college football. And, you got this guy wearing a top hat and a clown outfit, talking about how, Notre Dame's not really that good because they didn't play in a conference. It's like, well, they played one fewer Power 5 team this year than like any other Power 5 conference, but whatever, that's a different conversation. But no, it doesn't ramp. It doesn't go away. And they can beat Georgia. They can beat Penn State. They can beat Ohio State, and it's not going to go away. Because people don't understand why they're independent. Most non-Notre Dame fans, and even some Notre Dame fans, don't understand why they're not independent. I will say this: forget what fans say, because fans are always going to say that Notre Dame should be independent. You have James Franklin making his lame, justification for why they should be independent and all this other nonsense that just made no sense. Like, there's cases to be made for Notre Dame to have to join a conference. His was lame and lazy and just kind of petty. But if Notre Dame wins this game, that's dead from a practical standpoint. There's nothing you can then do to Notre Dame to force them into a conference, in my opinion. Because, look, we gave away playing home. We gave away getting a bye. We gave away getting a top 4 seed. We did this, we did that, and we still went 12-0. We beat the SEC champs. We beat the top. We beat 3 Big Ten teams to get there, and all this other kind of stuff. So why should we have to go to to the Big Ten conference? We beat 3 of their 4 best teams in the postseason, and the only team we didn't beat, we beat the team that beat them. Like, that's the talking point that Notre Dame has if they win a championship. So fans are always going to say what they're going to say. I care more about the power that Notre Dame has when it comes to negotiating their spot in the college football playoff. You win this championship, and I mean, you have now all the leverage when it comes to maintaining your independence.
So my stance on this is that I don't believe that Notre Dame should join a conference because they're not playing a difficult enough schedule, or because just by principle that they should be in a conference. I don't blame in any such way Notre Dame. Of course, they're doing what's best for them, and they're being allowed to do that. There is no structure in place for college football nationally. There's no governing body. There's no commissioner. Therefore, Notre Dame is going to do what they want to do, and they're going to work in the best interest of themselves. I completely would do the same thing. From a structural standpoint, I would like to see all of college football played in the same structure. But my argument isn't that Notre Dame plays some easy schedule or anything like that, because they don't. There are tons of schedules out there that are easier than Notre Dame's from year to year.
I just don't think in a league as big as even the Power 5 that there's a way to get the uniformity that you get in the NFL. And that's kind of where we'll always somewhat disagree.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing. And so,
yeah, I don't disagree with that, but we would work toward it. But no, it's not going to get to that level. There's too many teams.
Right. I would simply say this. I think if you were going to try to somehow shut Notre Dame out of the playoff or out of a championship, that opportunity was in the 4-team era, in the BCS era. That's when you could have had a leg to stand on to say, well, did they really deserve to be there in 2012? You look at their schedule. Michigan wasn't as good as you thought, and Oklahoma lost 3, whatever the reasons that you came up with. But now in this era where Notre Dame has to win 4 games to win a championship, like, that's kind of out the window. Whether you think Notre Dame belonged there or not because of their loss to Northern Illinois, if you're still saying that they didn't belong there, you're just biased or not smart.
Sure.
You're not actually having a grown-up conversation anymore. And so that, like, if Notre Dame would have been 11-1 and lost to Northern Illinois and got into a 14 playoff and got smacked in the first round like they always have, then you could be like, listen, this is getting ridiculous. Like, at some point in time, they've got to have a weeding out process like all the other Power 5 teams did, because they keep getting here and getting smacked. I think that's out the window now with what they did this year. And if they win the championship, and who knows if they will or won't, we'll see how. I think it's going to be a great game on Monday night. Then that's completely out of there. In regards to the opinion of people that matter, fans are always going to feel how they're going to feel about it, right? It doesn't matter. Notre Dame can win the next 4 championships in a row and play the number 1 through 12 team in the regular season, and you're still going to get that. But you're not in the conference, you know what I mean? It's like, that's just the reality of it with some. But from a practical standpoint, if they win the championship this year, I think you've seen, like, they had to prove themselves in the postseason. And that's what I love about this new format. And I was not a 12-team proponent at first, Mark. I was like, play the bowl games and then pick your 4. Go back to the old bowl tie-ins, have the Rose Bowl be the Rose Bowl, and then pick your 4. That was kind of my way. Because then it's kind of like, now the 6 or 7 teams that actually are championship caliber, they get to go prove themselves in the bowl game. Some are going to lose, some are going to win, and then you've got your 4 to be a little bit easier. But I love the format because you have to prove yourself now. Does Indiana belong? Well, they belonged, you could argue, but they weren't good enough to be a championship team. Does Tennessee belong? Well, they had their shot to prove it, and they didn't prove it. And the teams that I felt were the best kind of emerged, and we saw them separate themselves. And that's, I had a perfect record in predictions for the playoffs so far. And I don't believe that I did anything earth-shattering.
Me as well.
I didn't think, they were all kind of no-brainers. You know what I mean? Like, and because I think the best teams kind of rose to the top this season?
I gave some thought to Ohio State, Oregon. I gave some thought to Notre Dame, Georgia.
Sure.
I gave some thought to Notre Dame, Penn State. Those are
Sure.
the only three, and not a lot of thought. But yeah, the two of us are 10-0.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing the tie is going to be broken in the
Sure.
championship game.
Sure. Yeah. I know who I'm picking, and I think I know who you're picking.